about how bees operate, or you think about how ants, they have a wisdom, right? They're just doing the things that they're doing because that's what they do. They're not thinking about it. So if your players have too many instructions, right? If you try and do too much through tactics, you're going to take away from this tremendous wisdom that each player has. So I think the challenge is, how do you unlock that wisdom so that they can operate with freedom in the framework that you create? And I theorize that you do that from intense and competitive practice sessions. So if the only 4 things you did during your practices were possession, finishing on goal, crossing and finishing, and then playing to big goals on a small field, on a very small field, right? You bring big goals close together, and then cut your team up into 3 teams so that you play king of the hill style. The team sitting out surrounds the field, and they play as neutral players with 1 touch. If you only did those 4 things every practice, what that's going to translate is it's going to raise your intensity level of your team. And if your team is more intense than any other team during practices, I don't think it matters that much what your tactics are doing, because players have a natural edge to compete. So if the only thing you did was make it so that any team who plays you, if your team is just much more competitive, you're going to have a great season, even with inferior tactics, whether or not. I will say one thing though, that as someone who's played soccer for the past 27 years at the D1 college level, at an average D1 college level, that your tactics, they seem too it seems not simple. Rich, you're worried about how to protect against a counterattack. It's like, who cares? Through your practice sessions, your players are smart. Great players, they're smart because players have a wisdom that, because if they're playing and they're competitive, that's just going to come out naturally. I mean, you'd be surprised at how smart your players are if you give them the freedom to just execute your game plan. So I wouldn't worry about trying to defend against a counterattack, because as long as you can clearly articulate, as long as you can show them with cones, right? This is important. It's not about, if you can show them with cones how they should move going forward, so their attacking shape with cones and their defensive shape with cones. If that's the only thing that you show them at team, right, it should take not even 2 to 4 minutes to show what your offensive shape looks like and what your defensive shape looks like. And then the true test is if you ask someone on your team, say, Tommy, show me our defensive shape, and then show me our offensive shape. That's the only 2 things you show them, and it should be as simple as shifting cones here, and then you shift them back here on the count for defending. That's it. Right? Because if you try to overdo too much, then they won't. If they can't understand what offensive shape, or if they don't know what offensive and defensive shape looks like, then you haven't done your job. Because once you give them the shape, then they have the freedom to react on the field. And that's what comes with, it's like once you give them the rules, then they know how to break them when the time comes. Right? Maybe you could exploit, someone falls over, or they realize that one of their teammates is in the wrong spot, so they need to cover. So they need to be aware of that. But that only comes if you give them the framework of how to operate. But you need to make sure your framework is not too overly complex, or else it's not going to translate, right? the plan is gonna be lost in translation if you can't show them simply what your offensive and defensive shape should look like, relatively speaking. Right. So I think my intuition is that you really care about these players, because you're in Boot Room asking this question, or Soccer Coaching Resources asking this question. So you definitely care about these players' success. So that's it. So raise their practice intensity, do the same thing every practice, and then show yourself with cones. If you see what your cones look like, if you see what your offensive shape looks like, if you can do that for yourself, then then that's the hardest part. That's the hardest part, just being able to do that. If you can do that, and then the next most important thing, have intense practices. Your practices should be more intense than your games, and if they're not, then that's a good place to start. So hopefully this helps.